for European Asian Studies here at the George Washington Elliott School of International Affairs. And we're very glad to have Leonid Volkov here today to give a presentation on the current situation in Russian politics. So just a couple of housekeeping things. If you want to ask a question, you're here in the audience, I'll turn to you first after the presentation. And then if you're on Zoom, please put your question in the chat and I'll read your questions from my laptop and I'll ask it to Leonid as well. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. And so please think of your questions early. And if you want to put it in the Zoom chat, I'll see it there. So Leonid Volkov is the chief of staff for Alexey Navalny. He was campaign manager for Navalny's mayoral campaign in Moscow in 2013, as well as for his bid to get on the presidential ballot in 2018. Between 2017 and 2021, Volkov has created and led Team Navalny's network of regional offices in 45 of Russia's largest cities. Volkov is in charge of Team Navalny's political projects, including the Smart Voting, a tactical voting campaign that yielded many victories for the Russian political opposition in the regional elections in the last several years, as well as in the Duma election held in September 2021. Since 2019, Volkov operates from abroad, as there are 7 politically motivated criminal cases brought by the authorities against him in Russia. He's also an IT professional by background and the co-founder of the Internet Protection Society, Russia's leading digital rights NGO. So let me turn the floor over to you for about 25, 30 minutes, then we'll have plenty of time for discussion.
Yeah, if I may.
Please.
Thank you so much for the invitation, first of all, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here and to be able to talk to the distinguished audience in presence and also to the hybrid audience somewhere else.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Lots of people.
Hi, hello. So, always a big pleasure to be here. It's my second time at the Elliott School at the George Washington University. And like it's always was a very nice discussion. To call what I'm saying like a presentation would be probably like a little bit of overestimation. So I just want to say a couple of words of where we are and where we are going and how do we assess the situation. And then to turn to questions as soon as possible, because of course like Q&A is always the most important and the most interesting part of such meetings. Like I really want to talk about topics that are of interest for you. But to keep everyone like updated and on the same page, let me say a few words about like the current political situation. There is quite a paradox. I mean, all news that arrive from Russia are bad news. That one is beaten up, that one is arrested, there is a new criminal case, this has been outlawed, this has been prohibited, there is a new repressive law, and so on. Every single news item is quite depressive. The general development of political situation is good. Makes me an optimist, keeps me optimistic. Well, it's a job requirement. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if I would not be an optimist. But I'll try also to convey this sense of optimism to you. I don't know, I mean, I'm a mathematician by background, and from my mathematical perspective, it's a bit strange that like a series of negative events sums up to something positive, but I'll try to convince you that it is possible. We are operating, so what helps us like to keep afloat and to think positively about the future of Russia and the like perspective of the opposition movement in Russia is the little technologies that I would call like zooming out like a little bit, like not to consider every single negative event, but like to zoom out and to see like where we were and where we are going. And what are the fundamental factors that actually influence like Russia's political life, like on a broader scale than like local events. Well, when we started like 10 years ago, we started with maybe like 50,000 subscribers on social media, like in 2011 when Alexey Navalny founded the Anti-Corruption Foundation, when we tried first to register a political party to participate in some regional elections. From that start, we managed to build a nationwide movement. Our monthly audience is about 10 million people on different social media, most notably YouTube, Instagram, our mailing list, our social media. Well, 10 million people is a lot. It's not yet that much that large as the outreach of the propaganda machine, but it's already getting comparable. Channel first monthly audience is about 20 million active viewers. So we are not yet on par, but already in comparable figures, and ours are growing. Zeros are going down. And we don't see why things should get worse for us and why things should get better for Putin. Because in our view, three fundamental factors will define development of things in Russian domestic policy for the next few years. The first factor is Putin himself. Well, he's not going to go. And that's a problem for him because people are tired. Very naturally, he's there for 22 years. Anyone under the age of 35 has never seen anything but Putin. And very naturally, it makes people tired and upset. That's life. And well, it's very natural for a human being to desire for some change, for some alternative and so on. And that's why, Alexey Navalny, despite the fact that he's being held in prison and he's not allowed to be on the ballot for any elections in 2013, still he's doing in the polls better than Vladimir Putin among voters under 30. This is not going to change. This demographic situation, okay, so new cohorts of voters are arriving, old cohorts are leaving, and this implies change in our favor. Young voters are also less subversive to propaganda. They are digital natives. They don't watch television. They don't buy it. They are better in accessing independent sources of information. We are ready to fight for them, and we are able to win the battle, to conquer their minds. Second is economy, or maybe first. Economy is bad. The average household income declines for 8 years in a row, and we don't see why this situation would change. Russians are, unfortunately, left 15 years behind the world. The economy is as good as it was in 2006, 2007, but in 2006, a lot of optimism was involved because the economy was at that level in 2006 after 8 years of growth. Now it's on the same level after 8 years of decline. And well, what changed with regard to 2006? Well, the number of billionaires tripled over these 15 years, while the average household income remains the same. Because the corruption machine became more effective. The average kickback rate for state procurement projects probably doubled over these 15 years. So the corruption, the system of corruption managed to become more efficient. They now know how to squeeze more of budget, of state budget. They now know how to steal more, and so it makes any change of global oil and gas prices meaningless. So even if we imagine that oil will be $200 a barrel, they will be good enough on still being able to steal and appropriate all the proceeds. They didn't know how to do it back in 2006, but now children have grown up and so on. Now they're much better on this. And this, of course, is an enormous factor. I mean, people feel it, and no propaganda could be good enough to explain ordinary people that their life is good when it's bad, and it is bad. And then the third factor is corruption. So technically, we had to shut down the Anti-Corruption Foundation after 10 years of its glorious history. So if there would be like a gravestone, it would read like Anti-Corruption Foundation 2011-2021. Of course, well, we are continuing our operations, but well, technically there is such a gravestone, so we can ask ourselves, okay, it's gone, what its main legacy? Its main legacy is that we educated people in Russia about corruption. When we started in 2011, less than 20%, I believe 15 to 17% of Russian voters considered corruption to be like a major political issue, considered it to be a problem. We educated them with our videos, with our investigations, with everything we did. We explain how corruption actually like affects their daily life, how it steals future of these ordinary people and their children, how bad it is with employing, drone videos, jokes, trying always some new formats, packaging our investigations in some various formats and so on. We managed to push this agenda through. It required 10 years of work, a lot of investment, but we managed. According to the latest Levada numbers, 60%, 59% of Russian voters now consider corruption to be a major issue, major threat to the future of the country. And that's important because this is something Putin can't get rid of. So we can imagine, for instance, like imagine in 2018, like more people would turn out against the retirement age reform, like 10 times more people. Imagine in alternate history. Would it be possible for Putin like to step back a little bit, like to revoke this retirement age reform? Yes, of course. It's just a matter of money. Well, retirement age reform as 250 billion rubles a year spare money that they don't have to spend on pensions and could actually like spend on luxury yachts and private jets and whatever. But okay, if there would be more protests, they could easily revoke it. And we saw it. We saw how they did cave to street protests and did revoke some unpopular reforms like on local level, like the square in Ekaterinburg, the Shia story, the Kostau story, many other stories. Like when there is enough energy of street protests, Putin is okay to step back. But corruption is essential. It's a cornerstone of, it's a foundational thing for all the regime. It's the country is run on corruption. The country is run for the purpose of corruption. Putin can't get rid of it. And we managed to educate people that corruption is a bad thing. So this gonna be also a very important factor. So we believe that on a broader scale, the clock is ticking in our favor. Like Putin, economy, and corruption will be three fundamental factors that will like affect the mindset of Russian voters and will change the situation. Like will further decline Putin's approval ratings, will create more demand for change, for political alternative, and so on. Well, it actually already happens. What is the main outcome of the recent Duma elections? It's of course that Putin is not anymore a majority leader. This happened. I mean, if we consider like the Duma elections of 2016, if we consider the presidential election of 2018, there was also a lot of voter fraud involved. Of course, we all very much aware of it. This famous Shpilkin's numbers prove it. But we have to admit, even if the elections of 2016 and 2018 were not rigged, Putin and respectively United Russia would still end up with a majority. Not so convincing, not a constitutional majority, but still, they were perfectly legitimate. In that sense that, well, these were dirty elections, but at the end of the day, they enjoyed like popular support. And it is very important. people had this feeling of this like popular mandate. Even our supporters, we did a lot of research, a lot of polling, a lot of focus groups. Our supporters were telling us, we know that Putin is evil, he's a thief, he's a killer, he's a corrupt government official, all bad things. But unfortunately, we feel the majority of people around us support him. Not anymore. If we consider the outcome of the Duma election September 21, 2/3 of Russian voters voted against United Russia. And that's very important. Now, they had to employ a lot of voter fraud to tweak the numbers, to keep the constitutional majority. The extent of the fraud was much higher than during the previous election, but most importantly, people saw it. We published yesterday, we published actually the results of our most actual poll on the perception of this past election. And it was for the first time that majority of Russian voters considered that this election was unfair. That's a new thing. Putin's voters considered that the election was unfair. United Russia voters considered that it was unfair. They are happy about the outcome. They are happy they won, but they know it was unfair. It is called a crisis of legitimacy. It is a crisis of legitimacy. So people know that it has not been a fair victory. Now, does it imply that Putin will have to go in 2022? No, I'm not predicting. He still has all the grip of the power, all the law enforcement, all the security services, all the money, all the power in the country. He's in full control of the situation. But his legitimacy is undermined. And it can play its role. Every government faces crisis, time to time. And in every government, in every country, has sometimes to go through the situation when it has to come up with some unpopular measures to say, okay, sorry, dear compatriots, but well, we have to do this and this, things that you don't really like, but we have to go through it. And that's where legitimacy plays a huge role. That's where next time Putin will have to do something like this, he has to count with the probability that people will just tell, who are you? We didn't vote for you. We didn't vote for United Russia. We know that you are actually have stolen the election. We know that you are legitimate. We don't want to. This is actually already happening. There was a brilliant report by Medusa yesterday that in Kremlin, they know perfectly that they need to introduce forced vaccination. Well, because the vaccination rate is 34% and it's a disaster. So the situation with COVID in Russia is a fair disaster, like the probably the worst in the world. But they don't want to do it. They realize they have to do it, but they also realize that if Putin comes up with the idea of forced vaccination, people will just it will ruin Putin's approval ratings. So they already have to think about this crisis of legitimacy. So once again, it doesn't denote that Putin will have to go in 1 year or two. It might last for another 10 years, unfortunately. But any new crisis will be actually a huge challenge for him because of this lack of legitimacy. And we see our job in challenging him, in creating crisis. We are good in using elections for this. And this past election actually was a huge crisis. We managed to achieve the political situation when the whole narrative about the election was like Kremlin versus smart voting. Nothing else existed. And well, okay, we are a small group of people operating out of the country, like 50, 60 people doing, well, some investigations, some political statements, some YouTube videos and so on, versus the whole like propaganda and law enforcement machine and the whole system of electoral commissions. And well, we ended up being like on par. Technically, if we consider like the scoreboard, they managed to overcome, but it was like a Pyrrhic victory. it didn't come at no cost. It cost them a lot. It cost them legitimacy. So they only managed to kind of defeat the smart voting by the cost of such massive voter fraud that people saw it and people recognized this election as unfair. So a good result. They challenged them and it cost them a lot. So, and that's actually how we operated through all the last 10 years. And that's how we will continue operating. Like being opportunistic, seeing opportunities, using them, creating challenges, putting them under pressure, putting them under stress, because people under stress tend to make mistakes. And well, then making use of these mistakes. And that makes us optimistic, because like general thing is, yeah, is it all quite good for us. All the most important factors are in our favors. Having said that, we don't have to forget that Alexey Navalny was poisoned by a chemical weapon. He's in prison. He is a hostage of that very people who tried to kill him 1 year ago. There is an enormous wave of repression in Russia and enormous crackdown against all kinds of independent media and opposition activity right now, that our friends and former colleagues are being taken hostage. Father of Ivan Zhdanov, the CEO of Anti-Corruption Foundation, Lilia Chanasheva, the former head of our branches of our, like indeed, like terrible news are arriving every day. And it's very easy to get depressed by that terrible news, to get like blown away with them. It requires some intellectual discipline, like to keep going, to keep working despite all of this. So far, we are able to preserve. I would say we try to consider the situation in that way, that not to concentrate ourselves on the opportunities lost, but to concentrate ourselves on the opportunities acquired. Like, we regret we had to dissolve our network of regional offices. We invested a lot. It was like my child. I mean, really, like I went to 52 cities when we were like building this regional network. I hired all these regional officers. They did a great job. And when we were forced to dissolve the regional network on extremism charges, it was like a major blow. And when we were like outlawed and forced out of the country, it was a major blow. Okay, let's try to consider the situation with a very different optics. Back in Russia, we never were able to afford a large like video studio with a lot of video production, because as you know, like every second month, some funny people in black hats would come with a search warrant, seize all the equipment, pretending it's material evidence for yet another criminal case. And so we always were like bootstrapped. We never would allow ourselves to buy a lot of equipment because, well, it would be gone in a month. Now, if you operate out of the country, you can actually afford like to triple the amount of content that we are producing, because there are no like material constraints. And we already did it. In this summer, after being forced out of the country, we produced more investigations, like twice more investigations than during the whole year of 2020. And we intend to like double this amount in the next year. So we lost many opportunities, but many new opportunities were created for us. Or for instance, like back there in Russia, we always very carefully considered our crowdfunding. Like we cared that like every ruble we get it from inside the country, not to be labeled foreign agent and so on. Okay, well, now we could be breaking back. Now finally we could reach out to the diaspora, to Russian software developers in Silicon Valley who were desperate to support us, and we always told them, sorry guys, we can't accept your pennies. Now, okay, please welcome, chip in. And it creates a lot of opportunities for us also. So once again, it requires some intellectual discipline to stay optimistic under the current circumstances, but we manage, because indeed this change of context created many new opportunities. Only a lot of flexibility is required, like not to regret what has been lost, but to make use of this new opportunity. But flexibility was always the key for our survival. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to operate within Russia's very toxic political atmosphere for years. And we believe we managed to maintain this flexibility like for the future. A final point. The current cleanup, the current crackdown against independent media and everything is, of course, not for the sake of cleanup, but for the sake of like getting prepared for the presidential election of 2024. The new political season has already started. Putin very much knows, I believe, that the situation is basically like quite bad for him, like in terms of approval ratings, in terms of political perspective. I mean, Kremlin, or at least like the political vehicle, like the Kirienko, the presidential administration, they are very data-driven. They do enormous amount of polls, of research. They are well aware of all the data. They take every decision based on some number of crunching. Like the polls they were running in April 2020, like there was a Sion poll asking, if something bad happens to Alexey Navalny, what do you think Kremlin is behind this or not? And this pretty much illustrates their modus operandi. So they are well aware of the political situation, which is not good for Putin, and the trend is very much declining. So they are preparing the political field for this new operation. But what will be the transition in 2024? Will it be a transition from Putin to himself, like Lukashenko did in 2020, or there will be some other model, like the model of Kazakhstan, with some new posting created for Putin, or the model he did like in 2008 with his substitute temporary president? Didn't know. And what's more important, Putin doesn't know himself. It's very important how he operates. Like, he doesn't want to be the corner threat. He wants to keep all the options open. Untypical for him, he expressed himself very, very clearly on this in some recent interview. And he said, if I appoint a successor, everyone will start appealing to the successor. So it's very important for him, for the stability of the systems that he created, that there is a certain amount of uncertainty. He is ruling through uncertainty. Indeed, the moment he proclaims what next, the moment he explains to his elite, like, this guy is my successor, he becomes lame duck at that very moment. People will try to build coalitions and like solve questions with the successor. So it was the idea of Putin's constitutional reform to create as many options as possible. And he did. So he might get re-elected. He might become head of Security Council. He might become head of State Council with indefinite, undefined, and very vague like responsibilities and opportunities. He might become prime minister or like senator or whoever. Every option is open, and he doesn't have to make a decision before December 2023. And he will not make any decision before December 2023. Being aware of this, we once again shall pursue our strategy, like to see opportunities, to create challenges. And one of these challenges will hopefully be the one where Putin will not be able to resolve the crisis because of the lack of legitimacy. That's how we see the picture in a nutshell. 25 minutes, yeah. And let's jump to the questions as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for those remarks. So let me open the floor to questions. If you have a question, raise your hand and please identify yourself and ask your question. That's in the back.
My name is Roman Kalishak. I'm from Ivano-Franko University, Ukraine. You quite skillfully avoid that you never mention Ukraine. Yes, well, this is part of your flexibility. I'm not sure to the extent you can publicly comment on Ukraine. Well, what does this transition mean for my country? Thank you.
No, I didn't avoid Ukraine intentionally. I covered domestic policy, and Ukraine has become much less of a subject of domestic policy. After 2014, if you would watch Russian TV, you would have a perception that Russia is a very small country surrounded by Ukraine. Like nothing happened on Russian TV but Ukraine. How it is bad, and like it was very important for Putin, who was scared to hell by the revolution of 2014. He was scared to hell that he's going to repeat. So he did like an enormous job. All his propaganda machine was trying to explain to Russian voters that they don't need the revolution of that kind, because you see how bad is life in Ukraine, how they are eating children alive and torturing people and whatever. You don't want this to happen in Russia. This story became old. This is not selling anymore. The amount of like Ukraine-related propaganda reduced dramatically, and that's quite funny. Like I'm here in Washington D.C. for the purpose of testifying tomorrow for the Helsinki Commission on corruption. There is a bunch of counter-autocracy bills now on the Senate floor that have already passed the House, and I'm actually here like on the anti-corruption agenda, and I'm doing like a lot of meetings on the Hill and with other like government agencies on corruption, and people keep asking me about like the military buildup around Ukraine, and it seems like the narrative here in Washington D.C. is much more concentrated on Ukraine than it is back there in Russia. And well, I even had doubts if it, like maybe my perception is wrong. I double checked. I read like all I dived into like propaganda channels, what they're writing, because it's like when they took when the annexation of Crimea happened, there was a lot of preparation. They did a good job like explaining to Russian voters why like Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine, like, you know, unlawfully in 1956. And it's all ours. It's like, you know, Kherson is where like Vladimir the Great baptized Russia and so on. So there was a lot of, you know, preparation of the public opinion for this. So if they really want to invade once again and, I don't know, try to annex like Donetsk and Luhansk, there also would be some preparation, some explanation of enormous historical value of Luhansk for like Russian people. It doesn't exist. Such a narrative does not exist. So I very much believe that like the recent military buildup has the same nature as the military buildup in April had. Well, in April, Putin just wanted Biden to call. He didn't like being isolated. He wanted to be like important again, and he reached his goal. Like Biden called, invited him to Geneva, to the summit, and then, well, Putin's very typical modus operandi, like to create artificial problems to be able to negotiate resolution of these problems for something. I believe he's doing exactly the same once again. And like Lukashenko is doing the same, like an artificially created crisis on the Polish border, and now Angela Merkel is calling twice in 3 days. Suddenly, Lukashenko is suddenly not anymore like a pariah of European politics, but someone worth talking to, and he is luckily like creating of resolution of the crisis he created for something. So I don't believe Putin is going to engage in some like military conflict in Ukraine, and I'm very much hope I'm not making a mistake here. But he's really trying like to distract us from something important. Yeah, he wants Biden to call him to discuss Ukraine and not crack down on Memorial and independent media in Russia, something like this, I believe. And that's it. Now, this is probably the second part of your question, like what would the transition mean for like relations between Russia and Ukraine? As we said like many times, the annexation of Crimea was illegal. It was Putin's crime against interests of Russia because it caused sanctions, it caused isolation of Russia, and so on. But it happens so that a crime can't be easily undone. You can kill someone, you can punish the killer, but you can't revive the person who died. So this crime has been committed, we condemn it. We don't see, frankly, like an easy way to get out of this situation being created. So it's like a fair political forecast that unfortunately Crimea will remain an issue of foreign policy like Northern Cyprus or West Bank for many years before probably the next generation of politicians will be able to build a roadmap to find a new like legal framework for resolution of this issue. Like, well, we believe that the post-Putin government will start to develop such a framework, will start to engage into it, but it's not going to be an easy way and an easy solution.
Okay, thank you. So if you have there's a couple questions online, not yet, but if you're online and you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the chat. Is there any other questions here in the room? Yeah, you're also.
Because my question is related to the previous one, I'm Yaroslav Pelinsky from Ukraine, Fulbright visiting scholar. But I think it's much more easy question. So what do you think about public opinion of so-called ordinary Russian people concerning upcoming Russian-Ukrainian war? About we hear a lot from the internet.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. I got your question. Why I do think that Putin is not up to a military operation in Ukraine is because I'm very sure, and also based on some numbers, that ordinary Russian people will not support it. It is true that ordinary Russian people like applauded the annexation of Crimea. Unfortunately, but this is a fact. But this was because no shots were made, no blood was shed. Putin managed to sell this idea. They wanted to go back. This was all voluntarily. There was this fake referendum with 96%. This was a very peaceful thing. And unfortunately, as we all know, like Russian people applauded and they supported, and Putin's approval rating like bumped up to like 80-something% from the 50s. He was actually at historical lows in fall 2013, like it was 50-something for the first time of 10 years, but now it's way below 50. Of course, Putin is trying to find another silver bullet. He enjoyed it very much, how it worked in 2014. He would love to be able to do something similar, like to sell this something like, okay, annex something else and to sell to his domestic audience this idea that, well, I'm a great rebuilder of the Soviet glory and unificator and so on. But once again, it was possible because no one got killed. Even with Syria, he was not so successful. The adventure in Syria in 2016, they were not able to sell it. When coffins started to arrive, they first invested enormous money into hiding it, like really like bribing the families, the mothers and wives of those mercenaries, like to shut up. And then they kind of like almost stopped it. And like, as you know, like 4 times they announced publicly that they are retracting troops from Syria, like once and then second time, and like they defeated COVID already 4 times also. Because they saw that the news about retraction of our troops from Syria sells much better than news about buildup in Syria. People didn't like it. People didn't like the idea of military action somewhere for an unclear reason of coffins arriving. This gave a very thorough reminiscence of Afghanistan in the 80s. And so they kind of wind it down. So as I can't imagine a annexation of like Donbass without enormous like military operation with like many victims on both sides. So I can't also imagine how Putin would dare for such an operation, given the current domestic political situation in Russia, because people would absolutely not support it. Well, that's my assessment.
Okay, oops, yes. Go ahead. And then Marlene.
Okay, thank you. Martin Ilyusik. I'm also a Fulbright visiting researcher here at the department. From the Czech Republic, and my focus is energy in international relations. So my question is related to this. I'm sorry if you covered the topic. I arrived late for which I apologize. But do you see that energy as a major export commodity of Russia will play a role in the power transition in the future? Because in 1990s and in 2000s, this was a major factor in economic consolidation of Russia, and actually in Vladimir Putin's and the way how he get to and how he holds on to the power, because the economic consolidation and the power capacity of Russia has been fueled by rising energy prices and thus also increased influx of money into the economy. We are now on the brink of energy transition, and countries relying on the fossil fuels and the traditional way of use of energy commodities in the economy might face some issues with the source of the financing that they were using for fuel their economies. So this might very much be the case of Russia. So I would be interested in your take on the future development, the role these state companies play in the Russian power transition, and the view forward, the view on the development. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, full disclosure, I am definitely not an expert on energy markets. I think Vladimir Milov will be soon in town, so you have to get him to talk on this. But I elaborated like a little bit on this during my opening remarks, that Russia is much less dependent on fossil prices anymore, because the corruption become much more efficient. Like back in the 90s, we had this feeling like everyone knew, like everyone in Russia was actually like tracking the oil prices. They get higher, it means there will be some money for, to pay salaries to school teachers. They're going down, there will be probably no money. Now this dependency has smoothed up, because whatever oil prices, they will be able, like Putin's friends will be able to take care of all the proceeds. And they don't have so much influence on the economy. Apparently, even after the transition, this metaphoric, beautiful Russia of the future that we are aiming for some time will be dependent on the exports of oil and gas. There is no magic to kind of change the structure of economy like in a few months or a few years. But of course, this will be a strategic goal for any next government in Russia to get rid of this dependency. Actually, well, Putin is talking about getting rid of oil price dependency for 20 years, but he's only talking, he's not doing anything. And this will be one of the major challenges for the next government to actually do something. Well, we have a team of experts. If you read Navalny's presidential program of 2018, there is a good share of this program actually devoted to the transition, the green transition, how to get rid of this dependency. But as I told, I'm not the best person to talk about this.
Thank you. Marlene.
Yeah, hello, Leonid. Marlene Larel, Iris Director. I have a question on urban activism, and I would like you to develop on what is happening in some of Russian provincial cities. As like, could you tell us how you see this kind of regional activism emerging in some specific cities and kind of urban political life becoming really a place where you see resistance to the regimes and opposition taking shape in trying to be kind of depoliticized or to look only at kind of urban issues as a place where the political fight is getting kind of reinvented now?
Thank you so much. Myself, I'm not from Moscow. I'm from Ekaterinburg. I started as a local activist, member of a city council. I got elected as the only independent member of city council in Ekaterinburg in 2009. I'm old. So, and then started like my political career as a like local activist on urban issues. Like the first things that like kind of made me famous was a protest against like building a church in the square and city center back in 2010. And I always said there is a lot of importance to these issues. And it was my idea kind of like to expand our movement like countrywide, to build this network of regional offices. And I was very proud that we actually succeeded. This is very important, and this is not a coincidence. Like when we ran the presidential campaign, and we used it like to expand regional over the country, like the largest rallies that we've seen in terms of turnout, in terms of like percentage of cities population attending the Navalny rallies were not in Moscow, not in St. Petersburg, but in Murmansk and Smolensk, cities like never present on Russian political map before. Like we had like a 3,500 people turning out in Murmansk, like above polar circle during very bad weather, and city of population of like mere 200,000. It was enormous. There was so much demand for like independent politics, for political debate, for something like this. We saw like how people wanted to engage. And it yielded us something. Like when Alexey Navalny got arrested in January, 180 cities turned out. Large cities, small cities, very small cities. Like cities you barely know the names. And like it was very important. It was a popular movement. And this is no coincidence that Alexey Navalny first started to get traced by this poisoning squad when he went to Russian regions, when he decided that he is strong enough, he is ready to talk not only to the like liberal intelligence in Moscow, but to build a popular movement all over the country. And he was poisoned also when he was on a regional trip in Novosibirsk and Tomsk. And the major blow that Putin has placed on us after Alexei's return and arrest was also placed on the regional structures. So they specifically forced us to close the regional offices. And now this criminal case against Lilia Chanisheva is also something that they try to scare off our regional activists from continuing their political activities. Because after we shut down the regional network, so many former regional activists, like members of our regional offices, became activists of their own. So many of them like created regional independent media, activist groups, or something like this, something independent Telegram channels, whatever. Like I was very happy. Like 4 years of our investments in this regional network were not gone in vain. We planted the seeds that really gave something, like produced some plants. And this annoyed Kremlin enormously. And yeah, I mean, the most severe crackdown was placed against this regional activists. And still, I believe that political life in Russian regions will survive because the demand is so high. And we saw it during our rallies, during our trips to regions, like how much people needed for this like, breeze of fresh air. We once did an enormous, like a very large sociological study of our supporters. We distributed a questionnaire and we got, I believe, about 150,000 questionnaires back, like filled in, right? Probably like the largest survey we ever did. And there was few very important takeaways about our supporters, who they are. They're young, like not that young as propaganda pretends. 60% of them aged 25 to 34. Like they're very well educated. Their average educational level is like much above the average, like 80% of them, I think, with high school, university, bachelor, master's. And their income level slightly above, only slightly above, but slightly. It tells a lot. It's and most of them not from Moscow, most of them from smaller cities, vast majority. It tells everything about nowadays Russia. Brilliantly educated young people see a glass ceiling very well. Because if you don't belong to oil and gas industry, if you don't belong to the government, if you don't have relatives, even like the best education, intelligence can't yield you anything. If you were unlucky to get born in Barnaul, even if you are a software developer, if you don't move to Moscow or abroad, then you probably can earn like 60,000 rubles, like $1,000, not more. And this, of course, creates enormous also energy. These people know they deserve better. They know they deserve more. They know that this glass ceiling shouldn't be so low, and this creates so much like demand. And it's exactly like regional energy. So in Moscow, the salaries are very different, the opportunities are very different. And from Moscow, it's so easy actually to move abroad, but from small regional cities, there is no way out. And that creates a demand side of the price.
So we have a question from online. How do you see the role of the big IT companies, the big tech companies like Apple, Google, and Telegram in the Russian election?
Yeah. Well, the role is enormous. After we had to shut down the offline infrastructure, we only can rely on online. So we are very much dependent on big tech. We are very much dependent on Google, Apple, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And Putin knows it perfectly. That's why it was like another major battlefield during the recent election when he actually like threatened to employees of Google and Apple, like demanded to remove our application, threatening like arrests of their staff in Russia, and so on. So this will continue. So Kremlin will move on big tech more and more, because once Putin already celebrated this victory, and this could get worse, and not only in Russia. So Putin celebrated a very important victory when Google and Apple agreed to remove our application from Play Market and Apple Store. And well, it's very clear that many small Putins, Erdogans, whoever over the world are jealously watching and want to do the same. They now know it's possible. You can make these tech giants bow, and they will try to do the same. So of course, like there is a lot of demand for an asymmetric transfer, some technological solution probably that would make this censorship obsolete. We are working on it hardly. We are talking to tech companies, and they are also talking to us. I believe that, well, in a couple of years, well, hopefully, there will be just like new technological infrastructure in place that will make the current internet censorship tools not so efficient. And this will help us, and not only us, like civil activists all over the world, a lot. But as of now, it's like a major threat to everything that we're doing. Like, I mean, we invested 10 years of our activities and took enormous risks, arrests, poisonings, and whatever, into like building this user base, this outreach. And yes, it's very much endangered by the censorship, and we are very much dependent on tech platforms. As of now, the situation is very dangerous. But well, I can't elaborate a lot because it's like an engineering area, and I can't say much. But this seems a way out.
Yes, we have one question here. Wait for the microphone, please.
Hi, I have two questions. First is that from a friend who just left. Since you mentioned Lukashenko and Belarus Polish immigration crisis, can you shed some light on the rumors of the skilled immigrants and speak Russians with Moscow accents, like appears on the Russian border, like the Polish border?
Well, I prefer not to comment on rumors, but there is no such thing as Moscow accent. I mean, properly. I don't think that many people could actually distinguish it. So it sounds like rumors, and these are rumors. The situation in Polish border is pretty well covered. There is enough crisis without like people with Moscow accents. there is enough mess.
And my second question is that what do you think would be the impact of the global divestment from the carbon energy impacts on the Russian politics, since oil was always Putin's trump card?
Well, I think I already covered this question before. So I was saying that I'm not much of an energy expert, but well, Putin is definitely not able to enforce a transition and to make Russia less dependent from oil and gas. He had 20 years and he tried, but he failed because, well, his system is so much corruption driven that it needs oil and gas proceeds. And it will be a major challenge for the next government. And like every next year of Putinism makes this challenge harder. It's a big problem. Like we lose our historical chances with every year, like the gap to like normal like economy grows. And yeah, I mean,
So
it is a big problem indeed.
a couple more questions from online that may be good ones to wrap up with. So first on Ukraine, person's asking, do you see Mr. Putin's and Mr. Medvedev's recent articles about Ukraine sort of denigrating Ukraine as conflict, as an incitement to conflict and a propaganda ploy along the same lines as 2014? So how do you react to those articles? Second question about the smart voting system. Do you think that by tossing support to nationalist parties like Zhirinovsky's party and Communist Party, is that stimulating a nationalist and anti-Western sentiment in Russia?
The answer to the first question is no. So, well, Medvedev is no one. Like he's just no one. He's like a personality with no impact at all. Putin's article was, well, more disturbing. But once again, I consider this all like just like a propaganda attempts to create artificially some kind of crisis, where you could trade off the resolution of this crisis for something really important. The second question, the answer is no. Smart voting didn't endorse parties at all. It only endorsed individuals. It only gave recommendations in single mandate constituencies, and it endorsed individuals of very different party affiliation, which at the end of the day didn't matter. So once again, smart voting is in every district you select a guy who has the best chances to defeat the incoming United Russia member, and that's all. There is no other meaning in it, and as such, this strategy is very efficient because it's so simple and so clear.
Mm-hmm. But you don't think it's having these negative consequences?
No, and there are no negative consequences. Well, they I dismiss.
Okay. All right, so we have one last question, I guess. Yes, please.
Hi, Leonid. My name is Gulnasib Katulin. I'm visiting scholar here at IRIS. And my question is about, are there any particular efforts that your team undertakes in order to gain support in ethnic republics in Russia? Because I think a lot of non-Russians are concerned that the transition will somehow worsen the ethnic minority rights in the country. Thank you.
Ethnic republics in Russia suffer from corruption more than Russian regions, much more actually. Ethnic republics in Russia suffer from injustice much more than other regions. Extrajudicial killings of gay people in Chechen Republic is a well-known example, but not the only one. And what happens in other regions of Northern Caucasus is terrible. They need justice, rule of law, democratic institutions, free press, and so on, more than any other regions in Russia. We anticipate this, we know that, and we actually are we are well aware of this fact. The most viewed anti-corruption investigations, anti-corruption foundations investigations of 2020, before Alexey's poisoning, was Arashukov's family in Karachevich case, because it was something, and like people sent it, and it had also the largest percentage of viewers coming from WhatsApp. Like it was something that people like shared to each other, like, have you seen it? Have you seen it? Have you seen it? So it was like enormous. It had an enormous impact. Like being used, like everyone there in that republic and in neighboring republic, like discussed this Arashukov's plan, and their wrongdoings revealed in our investigation. So we believe that that our agenda is important for the ethnic republic, that it is very well anticipated there also, and they will benefit as no one else actually from the transition to the beautiful Russia in the future. So we are very optimistic in this regard. Well, right now, if you consider like the rating of Russian regions, like official data, Ingushetia is by far the poorest region, and among other like 10 poorest regions of Russia, there are 7 or 8 national republics, I believe.
Okay. So why don't we do one last question, and then we'll have to finish. This is the third last question, but
That's okay. That's so much fun to have many
the last
questions.
question.
Hello, my name is Kirill. I'm Fulbright visiting scholar from Yekaterinburg as well. And I have 2 questions, all of them, yeah, 2 last questions, and they concerns the word transition here. So what political science says about transition is that it can occur with 2 basic pathways. First is mass mobilization, bottom-up approach, and the second is elite split. As far as I understand, your view is that probably mass mobilization can occur. But what do you think about elite split? This is the first question. And the second, breakdown of autocracy doesn't necessarily mean transition to democracy. What Russia needs to do in order to arrive to democracy and not to get down to autocracy again?
Yeah, thank you for both questions. I'll try to keep my answer short because we have run out of time. The first one, we consider both scenarios as possible. So our approach is like to challenge them, to create problems, which to create crisis, which can result if Putin doesn't manage to handle this crisis properly. This can result either in mass mobilization or in an elite conflict. If the masses are unhappy with how he deals with the crisis, or if his elite is unhappy. So if there is like, well, instability, this could result in both. And we've seen post-autocratic transitions of both kinds. In many countries, it happened before because of mass mobilizations. In many countries, because of elite conflict. We don't know which will happen in Russia. We know how to increase the probability of either of the outcomes. For the second, we believe absolutely that Putinism will not survive after Putin, because it's like an autocracy built on so many like personal ties and relations, like unwritten rules and agreements. Like Putin rules through uncertainty. He has many cronies, lieutenants responsible for this and that. He balances the system. He resolves their internal conflicts. They all hate each other, and they all like there is a conflict among like between everyone and everyone. So they very much need Putin as a supreme arbiter, and the ability, Putin's ability to serve as a supreme arbiter for the conflicts of his lieutenants is derived from his legitimacy. People don't know or hate Sechin or Kadyrov or Miller or Tichenko. Most people don't know them, and those who know them don't like them. I mean, there is no possibility that Sechin would win an election somewhere. So they so much need Putin because they derive like their legitimacy from his one. So when Putin's legitimacy is undermined, his elite can consider him as not anymore like capable to be a supreme arbiter for their conflicts, and this is one of the possible scenarios for an elite split and for like internal coup or like internal conflict. But generally, so Putinism will not survive. Does it mean that well the next Russian regime will be democracy? Of course not. But the fall of Putinism through biological death of Putin, or through elite conflict, or through mass manipulation, will create an enormous window of opportunities that we will have to use. This will be the situation when, like, well, the current system will cease to exist, and there, of course, like there will be a huge conflict between all important elite players. Every one of them will try to rise like as the next Putin. Well, that is where like the civil society will have to step in. That's the moment for which we build our support base, our outreach system. This is a moment where we will have to step in and say no. We need a fair election, we need a competitive election, we need a democratic transition. This will be our opportunity. Hopefully we will not miss it.
All right, well, thank you very much. You answered a lot of good questions.
Yeah, hopefully.